What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. We got a very loaded episode on today's JT Sports Podcast, man. NFL training camp updates. We're going to be discussing how Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs are doing. Quarterback one competition is starting to heat up for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers between Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. Bill Belichick's future with the New England Patriots is a huge mystery. Why the Ravens had to change their offense. I'm a little bit irritated that people are trying to knock the Ravens for switching their offensive coordinator. It's like last year they were saying the offense needs to get more out of the passing game, and then the Ravens bring in the OC who's going to get more out of the passing game compared to Greg Roman, and then you got some people who are questioning it. Makes no sense to me. We're going to talk about that. Also, we got some conference realignment talk. You guys know I love drama. I love getting messy. And the Big Ten is eyeing 4 Pac-12 teams. They already took USC and UCLA from the Pac-12, and they're looking to add 4 more. And we also are going to be discussing the gap between the Big Ten and the SEC, because I saw somebody on Twitter last night say that the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is not that large. Before we start, if you haven't already, make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel. We go live every day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern time or around 5 p.m. Eastern time. Remember that this podcast isn't just available on YouTube. You can find us on all podcasting platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon. Wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the JT Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us with a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate it. We are trying to get to 100 5-star reviews before the college football and NFL seasons kick off. So go ahead, rate us 5 stars on Apple and Spotify. All you got to do is type in the JT Sports Podcast and it will pop up. Or you can go down to the description down below, scroll down a little bit, and there will be the links to the Apple and Spotify versions of the podcast. NFL training camp updates. I want to talk about Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. Let's check in on the rookie running backs. How are they doing? Again, so far, they've been performing as expected. Bijan Robinson, this dude has been trending on Twitter for the past 3 days for what he's done at training camp. He's rounding up linebackers and cornerbacks and one-on-ones, and Jahmyr Gibbs is doing the similar thing. And I was telling you guys when Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs were coming out the draft that these were different types of running backs. As a matter of fact, I didn't even label them running backs. I labeled them weapons because that's what they are. I was telling a lot of Falcons fans that Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, don't worry about who's going to get more snaps, who's going to get more carries, because it's not going to matter, due to the fact that Bijan Robinson is going to be on the field at the same time as Tyler Algier in most situations because of his versatility, his ability to not just be an effective running back, but really effective lining out wide at receiver, whether that be outside or via the slot. And you look at how well Bijan Robinson has ran his route so far throughout training camp, really impressive. I mean, this dude is a fantastic route runner. And his route running is the equivalent to a wide receiver too. Maybe better. I mean, the way he was lining up Troy Anderson and Caden Ellis was really nasty, man. And then he did Mike Hughes really dirty. Go on Twitter and find the Bijan Robinson and Mike Hughes 101 clip, man. Like, you would have thought that Bijan Robinson was a wide receiver the way he was running routes out there for the Atlanta Falcons over the last couple of days at training camp for them, man. Jahmyr Gibbs, same thing. And something that has been brought up a lot when mentioning Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs and how they've performed up to this point in training camp has been that not only are they really effective running backs, but their passing Well, their effectiveness on the passing game is really something that has caught a lot of people by surprise, because you don't expect running backs to be this polished when it comes to running routes. This is scary. And these are going to be the two running backs who change the RB position for the foreseeable future in the NFL. If you don't have a Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs kind of skill set that allows you to be used as a wide receiver, you're not going to be able to demand a lot of money as a RB. That's just what it is. If you want to get paid highly as a running back, you got to be able to do it all, baby. Not just run the rock good, but you got to pass block and you got to catch the football. Jahmyr Gibbs, his vision, his explosiveness has been on full display for the Detroit Lions throughout training camp up to this point. And for Bijan Robinson, he's been one of the best performers throughout training camp for Atlanta. It's been him and a couple of other guys on the defense. And when you look at Bijan Robinson, this is somebody who has not just great vision, but he's also fantastic after contact. He's really scary in the open field if you're a defensive back. And lining him out wide is kind of a little bit unfair. It's kind of like a cheat code. You got somebody who not only is effective after the catch, something that a lot of today's defensive backs don't really do a great job at, is tackling. These safeties, these cornerbacks, they don't want to tackle. So imagine them one-on-one with Bijan Robinson. Who are you taking? The defensive back or Bijan Robinson? I'm putting my money on Bijan Robinson. Similar thing with Jahmyr Gibbs. The difference between Jahmyr and Bijan is that Bijan is better after contact. Jahmyr Gibbs isn't really a dude who thrives at making a killing after initial contact. He's somebody who's going to make you miss in the open field due to his elusiveness and his elite acceleration and speed. He's not really somebody that's going to power through you. He's more of a elusive back compared to Bijan Robinson, who's more of a all-around back. Not just can he beat you with finesse, but he can also run through you with power. Now, both of these guys are sensational running backs. Like I said a couple of weeks ago, I believe that Bijan and Jahmyr are going to reshape the running back market. These are going to be the new standards at running back if you want to get paid a lot of money. So Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, so far throughout training camp, they've been really impressive. For the Atlanta Falcons, their head coach, Arthur Smith, said that one thing that has stood out the most about Bijan outside of his athleticism is the versatility. This dude is the human definition of a chess piece. You can move him all around the offense and create all kinds of matchup problems for opposing defenses. Similar thing can be said about Jahmyr Gibbs. Even though Bijan Robinson is probably going to have more carries and total touches than Jahmyr Gibbs this year because the Lions have way more weapons and mouths to feed on that offense compared to the Falcons, Bijan Robinson is a beast. But Jahmyr Gibbs, don't get it twisted. This dude is also a dude himself. And you look at his offensive coordinator being one of the best in the NFL, he's going to find ways to get Jahmyr Gibbs involved in this passing attack and also on the ground, despite the fact that they have David Montgomery. And with Bijan Robinson, you're thinking about what the snap count is going to be between him and Tyler Algier. It doesn't really matter. Tyler Algier comes in at running back, Bijan goes in at wide receiver. Simple as that. So far for Bijan Robinson, his versatility, his route running, his playmaking ability has been highly praised amongst a lot of people in the Falcons organization. And the Detroit Lions have been singing similar praises about Jahmyr Gibbs. These running backs aren't all that different. The biggest difference between Bijan and Jahmyr, in my opinion, is that Bijan Robinson is better after contact. After that, it's pretty much an even fight. Both Jahmyr and Bijan are incredible route runners to be running backs. They're really good as wideouts. I mean, the sky is limitless for what Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs could do throughout their NFL career. Now, let's check in with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback battle, man. This thing is incredibly close. And let's be honest, nobody expected Kyle Trask to have a shot at winning this job. It's like you acknowledge that this was going to be a quarterback battle, but if you were betting on this thing and you had to put your money on who you felt was going to be the starting QB for the Bucs come week 1 this year, most people would put their money on Baker Mayfield. But so far, Kyle Trask, according to these reports, has been the better performing quarterback. Now, the first couple of days of camp, both Kyle Trask and Baker Mayfield started out on the same footing. But since the third day of camp, Kyle Trask has just kind of taken this competition by the throat. He's been the best quarterback of the two the last couple of days, and it hasn't really been all that close. He's been better with taking care of the football compared to Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield, up to this point in training camp, has 5 interceptions. Do you know how many Kyle Trask has? Only 1. And before you say, man, JT, this is the time when quarterbacks are supposed to take extra risk and they're supposed to be a little bit extra careless with the football because you got to take chances in training camp. That's the only way you're going to learn and get better. Yes, that is true. But at the same time, you got to understand that you got to take risk as a quarterback, but you have to take calculated risk. Even in training camp, you're trying to compete for a starting job. So Baker Mayfield doesn't have the luxury of going back there underneath center and experimenting, trying to take extra chances to learn from his mistakes. He doesn't have that. He's trying to win a starting QB battle or a starting quarterback job. And when you're in these kinds of competitions, your margin for error is incredibly small. And the good thing for Baker Mayfield is that we got a lot of training camp to go. And this quarterback battle could drastically tilt in his favor any moment, any day, any time. But for Baker Mayfield, him with all these interceptions doesn't look good. This is the same problem that has hindered him throughout his NFL career. Careless with the football when he was playing for the Panthers last year. Similar thing when he was with the Browns. Kyle Trask right now looks like the better quarterback of the two. And you got to remember that Kyle Trask is no slouch. He was a 2nd-round pick by the Buccaneers not too long ago. And he's been more impressive than what I initially thought he would be. As a matter of fact, I didn't think he was going to impress at all. I thought that this dude was just going to be a jabroni and he was going to be a lock to be the backup for the Buccaneers. But this dude right now is showing some serious, impressive displays of passing. His ability to throw the football, even though he doesn't have the greatest arm, his deep ball, I think, is really underrated. He threw a really nice deep ball when he was playing for the University of Florida under Dan Mullen. And one thing that has been mentioned about what has improved the most about Kyle Trask has been the velocity that he's putting behind the football on his throws. He's throwing the ball with way more power, way more arm strength than what he was previously. That has stood out. He also is showing that he's a better athlete than what he initially was given credit for. Kyle Trask is one of those old school quarterbacks. He's big, tall, good arm. He kind of gives you one of those prototypical air raid style quarterbacks that Bruce Arians loves. But with Kyle Trask, though, he wasn't really seen as somebody who was going to be a threat to run the football. Well, so far, he's made a good amount of plays with his mobility. He also had a rushing touchdown, if I recall. So Kyle Trask, everything that people thought this dude wasn't, he's the complete opposite. You thought he wasn't going to have a shot at winning this quarterback job? He does now. At least he made his opportunity. He may not have had a great opportunity prior, but he has given himself a great chance to win this starting quarterback job. And for the way things are going for Baker Mayfield, man, he really needs to step it on up. He's a veteran. You don't expect a veteran to go out there throughout training camp and make a lot of mistakes. Even if you are learning a new system, there are certain mistakes when it comes to reading coverages and breaking down defenses that you should know what to do and what not to do. Baker Mayfield has 5 interceptions and Kyle Trask only has 1. And that says a lot about Kyle Trask and the improvements that he has made as a quarterback. Baker Mayfield hasn't really improved at all. He pretty much is the same quarterback now that he was when he got traded by the Cleveland Browns to Carolina. Baker Mayfield has been a little bit disappointing. And I know the expectations for the quarterback play out of Tampa Bay isn't high, but Baker Mayfield has a really good situation that he's walking into. You're going against a guy who doesn't have any starting experience in the league. You got a very good group of wide receivers around you. And for Baker, you kind of thought that this would be an opportunity that he would grab by the throat and run with. And so far, he hasn't. This quarterback battle is really close. And at this point, you kind of got to say that Kyle Trask is the better QB. If the season was to start right now, who would the Buccaneers most likely start back there at QB? I think it would have to be Kyle Trask. And before you say, oh, Baker has the experience, he'll start. He hasn't looked like the guy who's been the more experienced player throughout training camp so far with all these turnovers. When you have a guy that has the experience in the league that Baker Mayfield does compared to Kyle Trask, this interception differential shouldn't be that big. If anything, it should be Kyle Trask having 5 interceptions and Baker Mayfield only having 1 due to how young he is. Baker Mayfield is a vet now. He's been around the block. He's been in the league for countless years. So there's no reason for him to come out and be struggling up to this point in training camp. And he has had some good moments. But from reading the observations and the reports that I saw on Twitter and on a couple of Buccaneer websites, Baker Mayfield has been all but disappointing. Honestly, like Buccaneers fans, most of the fan base was believing that Baker Mayfield was the undoubted QB1 and Kyle Trask wasn't going to do anything about it. Well, Kyle Trask did something about it, all right. You know, you might have rolled off Kyle Trask, but so far, he isn't writing back. So Kyle Trask has been absolutely on fire the last couple of days for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers throughout training camp. And their new offensive coordinator, Dave Canales, who comes from Seattle, when he was asked if the quarterback competition has tightened since the start of training camp, he responded saying, oh yeah, absolutely. And Dave Canales is really hands-on. He's really involved in these quarterbacks learning and understanding his system. So for Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask, this battle is just getting started. And even though Kyle Trask seems to have the lead at this moment, it's not about how you start, it's about how you finish. And the quarterback who most likely ends up winning this job is going to be the guy who ends up having the hottest finish to training camp in the preseason. That's what quarterback battles are about. You want to start not just the guy who's been the most consistent, but also the guy who is the hottest at the right moment. Because football is also a game about momentum. And when you got a lot of momentum, normally that translates very well. And if Kyle Trask is able to keep up this momentum all the way throughout the preseason into the regular season, I think he wins this quarterback job. Now, if Baker Mayfield comes out of nowhere and he ends up ramping things up, then it makes this decision all more complicated. But right now, this quarterback battle is far from decided. If you thought that Baker Mayfield was the lock to be the starting quarterback in Tampa this year, you're wrong. And you better start rethinking some things because Kyle Trask is putting a lot of people on notice. Don't sleep on Kyle Trask. This dude was a baller for Florida. I know he didn't look good in the brief action that he's received so far, but Dave Canales has Kyle Trask balling out right now throughout training camp for the Bucs at this moment. So let me know, what are your thoughts on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback battle down in the comment section down below. And leave your thoughts also on how you feel about Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs' performances up to this point in training camp. Bill Belichick's future is really blurry right now. And I never would have thought that in all my years covering the NFL that I would be in front of you guys today talking about Bill Belichick being on the hot seat. Who would have thought that we would ever attach Bill Belichick's name to hot seat talk? But we are. And it's for a very good reason, because ever since Tom Brady left Foxborough, things have not been the same. They got mollywopped by the Buffalo Bills in the wild card round of Mac Jones' rookie season. And then in year 2, Mac Jones has a defensive coordinator becoming his offensive coordinator, which just was a recipe for disaster. And that was due to Bill Belichick hiring an incompetent offensive coordinator. Why would you make a DC your OC? We already spent a lot of time on that, not going to elaborate on that too much, but that was a really dumb decision by Bill Belichick. And this is why he's in the situation that he's in right now. And let's just be honest, whether you want to admit it or not, Bill Belichick's future with New England kind of hinges on the performance of Mac Jones this year. Now, obviously, it's a team sport, and you're going to need more than just solid quarterback play. You're going to need a great defense, and you're going to need your offense overall to perform better as a unit this season compared to what they did in 2022. And that should be able to happen with the addition of Bill O'Brien at offensive coordinator. But is this offense going to be good enough to be able to hang in games with the Miami Dolphins, the New York Jets, and the Buffalo Bills? And Mac Jones, if he ends up having another disappointing season, not only are the New England Patriots going to miss out on the postseason this season, but Bill Belichick probably is going to be in the unemployment line at the end of this year. Mac Jones is going to be a huge part of determining what Bill Belichick's fate is with the New England Patriots past the year 2023. Honestly, he spent the first round pick on Mac Jones. Mac Jones was a successor to Tom Brady. And anytime you spend a first round pick on the quarterback and they don't work out, it sets your franchise back several years. You also want to know what happens when you miss on your QB? You also, most times, if you're the head coach who drafted that QB, you end up being fired. Quarterbacks and their performance kind of make or break head coaches. You see what's going on with the New York Jets. They're banking on Aaron Rodgers being the guy. And if he ends up performing the same way he did last year for the Green Bay Packers and he doesn't end up bouncing back and being the answer at QB for them, Robert Saleh and their general manager are going to be out of a job. All because they missed on their quarterback selection a couple of years ago by selecting Zach Wilson. And when you miss on QB, it puts your head coach in a very uncomfortable situation. And Bill Belichick finds himself in this uncomfortable situation because he's mishandled his staff hirings at OC, and he also hasn't done a good job when it comes to the development of Mac Jones. And if Mac Jones ends up failing, Bill Belichick is going to be a large reason for that. You hinder him by bringing in an inexperienced offensive coordinator who never called plays before, doesn't really have a lot of knowledge on that side of the football, and it was pretty apparent last year. And going into this year, even if Mac Jones does play well, you don't know if you have a good enough team around him for this offense to be all that better than what it was in 2022. And you're going to need some offense if you want to at least make it to the postseason. You may not make a deep playoff run, but if you at least want to be a 9-10 win team and in the conversation to make the playoffs, you got to have somewhat of an offense. Just having a great defense isn't going to be enough to carry you this season if you're Bill Belichick. you're in a division that's arguably the best in the NFL with 3 teams who are all better than you, who many people feel could be Super Bowl contenders. The Dolphins are kind of viewed as a sleeper Super Bowl pick, but the Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets, there's a lot of confidence that those 2 teams are going to be up there in the Super Bowl conversation this year. And for the New England Patriots, you don't have an offense that's anywhere as talented as what those teams have. Your defense is going to be really good. But with Mac Jones, he's the really big difference maker. If he plays well this year, the New England Patriots, even if they miss the postseason, let's say they go 9-8, 10-7. Bill Belichick has a solid reason for why he should remain in Foxborough. Going 9-8 and 10-7 and missing the playoffs looks way better than missing the playoffs, going 7-10 or 8-9. Bad QB play isn't going to get you far. Even if you got a great team, when you're playing in a tough division, quarterback play and coaching matters. And for Bill Belichick, this team doesn't have a lot of talent. And therefore, he has to lean on his quarterback to kind of make up for it. And that's something that Mac Jones isn't really going to be able to do. Mac Jones was a first-round pick because he was considered to be the most pro-ready quarterback of the bunch. Not just that, but he had a really good football IQ, really accurate. And for Bill Belichick, you look at what he needs out of Mac Jones this season, you need him to be able to extend plays and be able to elevate the guys around him, something that I don't really think is in Mac Jones' bag of skills that he can be able to tap into. He's not somebody that's going to be able to extend plays. He's not somebody that's going to be able to consistently pick up a lot of yards with his legs on the ground. He does have mobility, but it's not elite mobility. If anything, he's a barely average to above average athlete at the quarterback position. So you need him to be upright, and you got to give him a good offensive line, and you got to give him receivers that are really good at separating and getting open quickly. And the Patriots don't have that. And Mac Jones is going to have to overcompensate for that some way, somehow. So Bill Belichick's future with the Patriots, man, it looks really dim. Honestly, you need Mac Jones to play at a high level for you if you're Bill Belichick to even have a chance of being in the conversation to even have the 7th seed. That's how tough the AFC is. The AFC is home to some of the NFL's best quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Trevor Lawrence. And you look at New England and compare their quarterback to the others in this division, they have the worst in the conference, or maybe in the AFC East. Some people probably say, man, JT, it's not fair to, look at Mac Jones in the light that you are. He's the worst QB in this division. Doesn't mean he's completely bad. I mean, that's true, but it kind of shows you everything that you need to know about New England. They don't have a good team, really, in comparison to what the Jets, the Dolphins, and the Bills have from a talent standpoint, and they have the worst quarterback in the division. So you got the worst team in this division with the worst quarterback in this division. I mean, what does that show you? What does that tell you? I think that kind of gives you a good indicator that for Bill Belichick to save his job potentially, he's going to need some really great performances out of his QB and out of his wide receivers. The offensive line should be improved, but this quarterback situation, we don't really know if it's going to be all that better than what it was last season. Because even if you do have a better offensive coordinator and Bill O'Brien, which you do, there's no guarantee that Mac Jones is going to be instrumentally better than what he was last season. He may be more efficient with taking care of the football, but Mac Jones isn't really a guy who's built to have to carry a team. If he has to carry a team, you're in trouble because that means you don't have a good team around him. And if he has to carry a team, he's not going to have a lot of success because Mac Jones is one of those quarterbacks that for him to be successful, he needs a great supporting cast. And the Patriots haven't really given him that. And the reason why we were so high on Mac Jones when he initially got drafted by the Patriots to begin with was because he was going to the best situation compared to the other rookie QBs due to the experience and how good of a coach Bill Belichick has been over his 24 years being the head coach for the New England Patriots. And what we kind of viewed as an advantage for Mac Jones kind of has been a little bit of a disadvantage for him over the last couple of years because we thought he was in a situation to succeed, and now he's kind of in a situation where you don't really know if he's going to be able to win or not. Same thing with Bill Belichick, which is why Mac Jones and how he plays this year, it's so important to if Bill Belichick is going to remain the head coach for the foreseeable future of this organization. I like Mac Jones. I'm still a believer in Mac Jones, but that doesn't mean I can't have any skepticism. Just like we have skepticism about Bill Belichick. Maybe he kind of has lost it a little bit as a head coach. You know, maybe he's starting to decline. Players aren't the only people who regress. Coaches regress too. At one point, Bill Belichick was arguably the best head coach in the NFL. No debate. And now, we don't even know if we can consider him a top 5 head coach. And we don't even know if he's going to be the head coach of New England in 2024. So, in some capacity, Bill Belichick's fate is kind of in Mac Jones' hands. If Mac Jones plays well, the Patriots should be in the playoff conversation. And they should at least have a winning record. Now, if Mac Jones doesn't play well, I guess it's adios amigos for Bill Belichick. But his future with the Patriots, I think, is going to be heavily dependent on the performance of Mac Jones this year. I've been hearing a couple of people in the national media be a little bit questionable of the Ravens' new offense. And some people even say that they made a mistake of changing coordinators. And listen, I don't think a lot of people honestly understand why the Ravens had to change their offense, why they needed to replace Greg Roman with Todd Monken. You look at Lamar Jackson and you look at how he struggled in the postseason, you wonder why. Well, look who's been calling the plays. Greg Roman. Oh, well, this is the guy who helped Lamar Jackson become an MVP. Yeah, he did. But you act like a quarterback can't outgrow his offensive coordinator. It happens all the time, not just in the NFL, but it happens in life. Sometimes we meet people that are not meant to be in our lives for our whole entire lifetime. Sometimes you meet people who are just meant to be in your life temporarily to help you reach another level. And then you move on, and they move on. And that's what the Ravens are doing right now. They were really grateful for what Greg Roman brought to their organization, what he was able to do with Lamar Jackson, helping him win an MVP, helping guide them to the number 1 seed that same season. And Greg Roman's rushing attacks, we already know, are some of the best in the NFL. And he has some really good run schemes. But when it comes to the passing game department, that's where he severely lacks. And that's why the Ravens had to make a change, because he was holding back Lamar Jackson as a passer. And it's funny how some of these same talking heads who are skeptical about the Ravens making the change to be more pass heavy are the same people who question Lamar Jackson's ability as a thrower of the football. So you're going to say, man, you don't know if the Ravens are doing the right thing by changing their offense, becoming more pass heavy when they had an offense that was perfectly tailored to Lamar's skill set. But yet, you're going to be one of those same people who are going to be skeptical of the Ravens deciding to go in a different direction offensively. Look at the league, fam. They call it a passing league for a reason. There's a reason why You don't need a great running back to win the Super Bowl. There's a reason why you don't need to be top 5, top 10 in the NFL and rushing yards per game to be a championship caliber football team, because it is a quarterback driven league. Whether you want to admit it or not, if you don't have a good quarterback, you're not going to go all that far unless you have elite coaching and a great team around him, i.e. the 49ers. And if you don't have a quarterback that's able to effectively throw the football, you're not going to go far in the postseason either. And Lamar Jackson is a really good passer, a way better passer than what most people give him credit for. He's been held back by not just the offensive coordinator and Greg Roman being inept at developing good passing concepts, but the Ravens, you got to remember what their philosophy was as an organization prior to this year. This was an organization that never really won having a lot of talent at wide receiver or even at quarterback. They won with Joe Flacco and having a bunch of decent wide receivers when they won the Super Bowl. With Lamar Jackson, though, it's completely different. It's not 2012 and 2013 anymore. It's 2023. You got to be able to throw the ball to win. Running the football is a good asset to have, and you definitely have to be able to run the football to win a championship. But you got to be able to be great throwing the football to win a Super Bowl. You don't need to be a great running team to win a championship. You just have to be good at it when necessary, which is what the Rams and the Bengals were when they both made it to the Super Bowl in 2021 or the 2021 NFL season. So when you look at the Baltimore Ravens and what has been the reasoning for why they've come up small in the postseason, it's been due to the lack of talent that they've had at wideout. It's not 2012 anymore. You can't just win with Dennis Pitta and a bunch of solid to below average wideouts and having a strong rushing attack. You need to have decent to solid quarterback play or better, and you need some good receivers. Ever since the Bengals took Jahmyr Chase in the first round a couple of years ago over Penei Sewell, and they went to the Super Bowl with him that same season, I realized that the league has started to change. You can still win, maybe not having the best of offensive lines, but you definitely need to make sure you got you some good receivers. All 4 teams that were in the conference championship games this past season had great receivers outside of Kansas City, but they still had Travis Kelce and Andy Reid. But the Bengals got T. Higgins, Jahmyr Chase, Tyler Boyd. Eagles got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. 49ers got Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. And the Ravens, who did they have other than Mark Andrews on this offense? Nobody. So with the Ravens, you improve your receiving core. You sign OBJ, who Lamar wanted, by the way. You draft Zay Flowers, who was regarded as the best wide receiver prospect coming out, in my opinion. And you also add Nelson Aguilar, who's going to give you pretty good depth. You got a good group of tight ends outside of Mark Andrews. A lot of people are overlooking Isaiah Likely. This is the most talented offense that the Ravens have had since ever, honestly. And if you're a Ravens fan listening to this right now, be honest. Is this or is this not the most talented offense that you guys have had going into a season? Because when's the last time the Ravens had a wide receiving core that was this good? When's the last time the Ravens ever had a wide receiver that was as good as OBJ? You can call OBJ washed all you want to, but this is the best receiver that the Ravens have had in this building since who? Steve Smith? And he was up there in age. So with adding more talent at receiver, giving Lamar Jackson the weapons that he needs to be successful to lead you to a deep playoff run, and giving him a offensive coordinator that's going to help elevate him and this whole entire passing attack, are going to be pluses. And these were changes that needed to happen. The Ravens needed to make a change at offensive coordinator. You want to know why? Because the offense just wasn't cutting it. They weren't having the same success the past 2 seasons that they were in 2019. The offense was getting stale. And you're not going to win too many games when you're down the touchdown. You need a game-winning score to get the game to overtime, and you're running 3 tight end sets with 2 minutes left on the clock. Are you serious, fam? 3 tight end sets with 2 minutes left to win a game or take a game to overtime, and we're in 2023? That's crazy. Real crazy. And for Greg Roman, he's not a bad OC. I think he's a really good OC. Shoot, if I was a head coach and I had a young QB that had a similar skill set to Lamar or the QBs that Greg Roman has worked with in the past, I would hire him in a heartbeat for a couple of years. And then after that, when my quarterback develops as a passer, I will move on from Greg Roman and find somebody else who can get my QB and my offense to a next level, to a next gear. And that's what the Ravens are hoping that Todd Monken can do. Look into Todd Monken's background. He isn't just a college coach, the label some people try to throw on him. He also was the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns, even though he didn't call plays. He called plays Dirk Cutter's final season in Tampa. And you know how good the Buccaneers passing attack was that year? It was number 1 in the NFL with Ryan Fitzpatrick and Jameis Winston. So when you look at Todd Monken's resume, this is somebody who knows how to get the most out of the passing attack. And with all the weapons that Todd Monken has at his disposal, plus Lamar Jackson, not just how good he is as a runner, but plus he's a way better passer than what he's given credit for, this offense is going to be the best that the Ravens have had in years. I don't know when's the last time the Ravens had an offense that was as good as what it could be this year, but this offense is going to be really scary this year. And the reason for that is because they made a change when it came to their offensive coordinator. You know, in life, complacency doesn't really get you anywhere. To keep advancing in life, you got to make changes. You know, for me to keep this channel up, for me to get this channel and this podcast to the next level, I got to adapt. I got to get with the times. I can't be running this podcast like I would be running a podcast a decade from now. You feel me? I got to adapt. The Ravens had to adapt. Smash Mouth football, winning football games the way they were was nice, but it wasn't going to be something that they were going to be able to do long term. You weren't going to be able to keep Lamar Jackson around 10 plus years as your franchise QB, running the offense that you were with him. Lamar Jackson has proven plenty of times that he's more than a capable passer. This dude is a really good passer, and I really wish that people would put more respect on Lamar Jackson's passing abilities. If you're struggling to get behind the Ravens' philosophical change on offense because you have concerns about Lamar as a passer, please go watch some Lamar All-22 film. This dude is a better thrower of the football than what many people on Twitter make him out to be. This dude is a really good passer, a really solid passer. I'm not saying he's one of the best in the game, but he's not no slouch, fam. Honestly, I'm getting a little bit sick and tired. If you're one of these people who are questioning this offensive change because you don't know if Lamar Jackson can cut it as a passer, cut it out, fam. Cut it out. This is somebody who is completing over 60% of his passes. Yes, he has regressed a little bit statistically since his MVP year, but it's not like this dude went from great to terrible. He went from great to, still pretty good. Not as good as what he was his MVP year, but that will change this season due to the change that they made with this offense. I can't really get behind the people who try to question Lamar Jackson's ability as a thrower when he's proven plenty times throughout his career that he's more than capable of being able to win games without his athleticism. His athleticism is part of what makes him special, but he's also a really accurate thrower of the football. And with these wide receivers that he has, he's going to be even better than what we've seen in the past. He doesn't have to run the football as much anymore. You want to know why? Because there's going to be more opportunities to throw the football to open wideouts. When you're running 3, 4, multiple tight end sets, you're not going to have a lot of receivers on the field. And with the wide receivers that the Ravens have had over the last couple of years, they haven't really been good enough to where you can only have 2 on the field and have a bunch of tight ends. Greg Roman's version of 4 wide receiver sets is 3 tight ends on the field. And if you think I'm making that up, go look up what he said in a production interview before the Ravens had a Sunday Night Football matchup. Chris Collinsworth asked him about the criticisms with his offense and the lack of receivers that they utilize. And he said, tight ends are like receivers to us in my offense. Yeah, big red flag. You hear those statements and you think a change didn't need to be made? Or didn't need to be made? I think the reason why people have skepticism about this is because you look at the Ravens and you're like, okay, they're having all this success. Why change the offense? Because the offense wasn't as good as what it could be due to Greg Roman holding it back, not being able to be inept at elevating this passing attack. So if you're asking yourself why the Ravens offense needed to change, stop looking at the records and just watch the game. Stop trying to judge everything from the box score, because the box score doesn't tell you everything you need to know unless you can actually watch the game and put context to those statistics. And even though the Ravens had great records when Lamar Jackson was healthy before he went down with those injuries the last 2 years, if you watch this Ravens team, you would know that this offense wasn't that great as what the stats may indicate and what the win-loss record may indicate. And in some capacity, you can say that Lamar Jackson kind of made this offense work at times. Even though Greg Roman had success with Tyler Huntley is a similar quarterback like the ones he's worked with and had success with in the past. As a matter of fact, when you look at Tyler Huntley play, he's like a great value brand version of Lamar Jackson. So, of course, not too much was going to change, but when you look at this Ravens offense in general, yes, they had some really good seasons under Greg Roman. They never had the season that made you go, they got to get rid of Greg Roman. And I think that's why there are some concerns and some skepticism around this change on offense. Because you look at what the Ravens were able to do, and you're like, okay, if you're having success, if it ain't broken, you're still winning games, then there's no need to change anything. But you see, if the Ravens didn't make any changes on offense, they possibly may not be as good as a team as they are right now. So change is necessary in order to be successful. In order to be successful, you got to be good at adapting. And if you can't adapt, you're not going to make it far. Complacency is key to not being successful in life. You got to make changes. You got to adjust. And what the Ravens did was make changes. They got uncomfortable. Yes, there is a chance that this may not work out. But given Todd Monken's history and his track record and his resume, this should work based on history and what he's done. But this change had to happen. Lamar Jackson outgrew Greg Roman. You got to get somebody in there who can get more from Lamar. And if you thought that Lamar Jackson was already insanely talented, you haven't seen anything yet, because there are still people who are skeptical about Lamar Jackson's ability as a thrower of the football. And you're about to see why so many Ravens fans are so excited about why they hired Todd Monken. Todd Monken is about to make this Ravens offense look like it was a super team or a super offense. With how good he is as a play caller and how well he gets the most out of the passing attack, this Ravens offense is going to be the best that it's been in a very long time, and they had to make the change. Detroit Lions outlook for the 2023 NFL season. The Lions are a really good team. They're one of the best teams in the NFC this year. And last season, they got out to a really slow start. But then they went 8-2 down the stretch. And now they're on everybody's radar. You're wondering, how improved is this defense going to be? The run defense was not good, and their secondary wasn't good neither. So what did they do to improve that? Well, they brought in a lot of help in the secondary. They signed cornerbacks Cam Sutton, Emmanuel Mosley. In free agency, they also brought in defensive back Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They drafted linebacker Jack Campbell. defensive back Brian Branch in this past year's NFL draft. So the Lions defense, at least their revamped secondary, looks really good on paper. Now, how is that going to translate on the field? We don't know. That's to be decided. But from looking at the Lions' defensive additions and thinking about what they already had last year, I think this defense should be a couple of steps better than what it was in 2022. I don't think this defense can go any lower than what they did last season. I mean, this defense couldn't stop a nosebleed. And with how good this offense is, imagine if the Detroit Lions can just have a above average defense or an average defense. That would be enough to potentially make this team, good enough to make it to the NFC Conference Championship game. Honestly, you're going to have one of the best offenses in the NFL. Ben Johnson was somebody who got a lot of looks for being a head coach this offseason. He ends up coming back to Detroit, and he probably isn't going to be in the Motor City for much longer. So the Lions, you look at the talent that they have offensively, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, there's a lot of talent on offense at wide receiver for the Lions. Now, you probably could use a little bit more depth. You may not have a wide receiving core that makes you go, this is one of the best in the league, but this is a really solid unit. They got some solid receivers on this squad, and although they're not guys who are going to make you jump out of your socks, I mean, you are really hyped up for what Jameson Williams can be when he finally can stay healthy and have significant reps and get significant playing time and targets thrown his way. We saw some glimpses of how good Jameson Williams potentially could be. But, we just got to see it. And when you look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of the better receivers in the game. And I also think that some of the guys that they have at wide receiver 3 and 4 aren't too shabby neither. Marvin Jones, even though he's up there in age, he's pretty productive to be at the state of his career that he's in. I mean, last year, the Jacksonville Jaguars, he made a couple of big plays. I mean, this is still a very solid receiver, despite the fact that he kind of is on his last leg of his career. And you add Jahmyr Gibbs at running back. We were already talking about him a little bit earlier on this episode. He's a weapon. He's not just a great running back. This dude, you can use him pretty much anywhere. You can line him up in the slot as a outside wide receiver because how good his route running is. There is nothing that Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs can't do. That's why both of them got drafted in the first round. And when you give a guy like Ben Johnson a chess piece like Jahmyr Gibbs, he's going to utilize it in every single way that he can find fit. And Jared Goff, I think, is probably the most underrated quarterback going into the upcoming NFL season. People forget that Jared Goff had a 14-0 touchdown interception ratio during the second half of last year when the Detroit Lions went 8-2 down the stretch, and nobody talks about it. People still view Jared Goff as this game manager QB. When Jared Goff has the right pieces around him and he has a really good offensive coordinator or really good play calling, he cooks. He deserves to get a little bit of MVP consideration. Now, would I put him in the top 5 of any MVP list? Probably not. But I do think he has a way better shot at winning MVP than what you may think. He has a great offensive line, really good OC, good group of wide receivers to throw the football to. Look out for Jared Goff. And Jared Goff has been playing some of the best football of his career. Jared Goff is playing at as high a level that we've ever seen from him since he took the Rams to the Super Bowl a couple of years back and they lost to the New England Patriots. And when you look at where the Lions rank in the NFC from a talent standpoint, I think that most of us can agree the Lions have one of the top 5 most talented teams in this conference heading into this year. I mean, this offense is stacked. One of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Jared Goff is one of the best QBs in the NFC. If you want to say, okay, JT, Jared Goff is a top 15, top 13 QB, okay. But where does he rank amongst NFC QBs? After Jalen Hurts, who would you put after him? I probably would go Jared Goff, Geno Smith, and Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins. And when I watched Jared Goff play last year, even when he got out to a little bit of a slow start, he wasn't bad. He didn't really have too many games where you looked at and you said, yeah, Jared Goff was just absolutely terrible. So I'm really high on Jared Goff going into this year, higher on him than most people. I think that he doesn't really get the proper respect that he deserves for what he did last season, having one of the best touchdown to interception ratios in the league, taking really good care of the football. And plus, being really good throwing the football downfield also, that's also something that people overlook about Jared Goff. How good he throws the deep ball. This dude is one of the most accurate deep ball throwers in the NFL. So we need to give Jared Goff a little bit more props. Can we give Jared Goff his flowers, at least going into this season? Because this dude is being heavily overlooked. And if the Lions are going to have a successful season and make a deep playoff run like some people are hoping they will, they need Jared Goff to stay healthy and to continue to play at the high level that he's played the last couple of weeks, the end last year. So when you are judging the Lions roster overall, this is one of the best teams in the NFC. They have some question marks on defense with their interior defensive line, their linebacker unit. Outside of Jack Campbell, you don't have any faith with who's going to be lining up right next to him. But I think that the Lions are a good enough team that they should be able to win this division, because right now they are the favorites to win the NFC North. So we'll see if the Lions are going to be able to live up to expectations. I believe they will, but we could always be wrong. I've been wrong plenty of times about the Detroit Lions, but this could finally be the year that the Lions come out and, they actually make a lot of noise. And for the people who are like, oh man, you just overhyping this Lions team, JT. This is the same old Lions. This is not the same old Detroit Lions. The same old Detroit Lions didn't have a good coaching staff. They never had any good coordinators. Did Matt Patricia ever have a coordinator on his staff that was up for any head coaching jobs? Same thing for who was the previous head coach, the black dude who they had fired, Jim Caldwell. Was he having any coordinators getting interviewed for head coaching opportunities? No. So for Dan Campbell, I think that Dan Campbell has this team trending in the right direction. He has built a really good culture in Detroit. Brad Holmes has done a really good job, in my opinion, of constructing this roster. Despite some of the criticisms that people may have about Brad Holmes, this is one of the better teams that the Detroit Lions have had in a very long time. The last time the Lions had a roster that was anywhere close to this good was the last time they made it to the playoffs. So the Detroit Lions, I think this is going to be a really good team this year. I think they're going to win the NFC North, and they're going to make a lot of noise in the playoffs. I think that they potentially could make the NFC Conference Championship game this year. This run defense, we don't know if it's going to improve dramatically, but it should improve slightly from what it was last year, which you'll take any improvement if you're a Lions fan. And with all the additions that they made in the secondary, I don't see how this pass defense doesn't take a couple of steps of improvement this year. So for the Detroit Lions going into the 2023 NFL season, I think that the hype that they have surrounding them is definitely warranted and well-deserved. And Detroit Lions fans, for the first time in probably decades, have a fair reason to be optimistic about this team and to have high expectations. This team has done a really good job throughout the draft. They did a really good job in free agency this year. So I don't think there's any reason why the Lions should disappoint and why they should fail to live up to expectations. This is a really good team, really good coaching staff. You've been getting great quarterback play out of Jared Goff lately. So I think the sky is kind of the limit for the Detroit Lions this season. And they may be a dark horse Super Bowl contender. Some people may consider them to be a championship contender. I think they are. Some people may say, they don't really got enough. You may feel like Jared Goff isn't good enough to get you far in the playoffs. But it's like, what other QBs are you going against that are on his level? Outside of Geno Smith, Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, and Jalen Hurts, who is better, it's not a lot of great QBs or even solid QBs in the NFC. So for the people who are saying the Lions won't get far because they got Jared Goff as their QB, take a look at the quarterback landscape in the NFC conference. There's a report going around that the Big Ten is eyeing some more teams from the Pac-12. Now, they already got USC and UCLA on the way. Now they're eyeing Washington, Oregon, Cal, and Stanford, according to Yahoo Sports. And if they end up getting these 4 teams, it pretty much is going to be the end of the Pac-12 conference. And I kind of already feel like it's the end for the Pac-12 conference with them recently losing Colorado and Arizona, probably the next thing cooking out of there. I think the Pac-12 is all but finished. And if the Big Ten ends up taking these 4 teams out the conference, this would be the dagger to the Pac-12. And they don't have a new media rights deal still. They are negotiating something with Apple around $20-something million, but a lot of teams aren't satisfied with that when you look at what other schools are making in the SEC and the Big 12 and in the Big 10. And for the Pac-12, their commissioner, he's in a really tough situation because the situation that this conference finds themselves in, about pretty much on the brink of extinction, isn't due to him mostly. It's mostly due to the previous Pac-12 commissioner being inept at really running his job effectively. And you look at the fact that, these Pac-12 schools, they want more money. That's really what it's about. It's about revenue. And although a lot of you guys who are Pac-12 truthers and you're like, man, like, we can still save this conference, bringing in Boise and San Diego State. Those schools are not going to save the Pac-12 if these 4 schools end up leaving for the Big Ten. Washington, Oregon, I'm pretty confident, and most of us who are looking at this situation logically are pretty sold on the fact that Oregon and Washington are going to leave the Pac-12. It's not a matter of if, but I think it's just a matter of when, if the right opportunity presents itself. And the Big Ten getting Washington and Oregon would be huge additions to that conference. They already have extended themselves into the West Coast market with adding UCLA and USC. Why not continue to expand into that West Coast market by adding Washington and Oregon? And Washington has a pretty big media market. And Oregon, I don't know how big their media market is per se, but they do got a really big fan base. And I do think that Oregon football does generate very good ratings. People love watching Oregon. Either you're a fan of Oregon or you love watching them play because either you're a diehard college football fan or you just love seeing their jerseys and all the 100 million jersey combinations they got. And Oregon and Washington have been 2 of the best programs in the Pac-12 conference for over the last couple of years. USC, you got to remember, they haven't really been that consistent. They had some good years, but they've also had a couple of down years. So Oregon and Washington, although both those schools have had their downs, they've probably been the most consistent programs in the Pac-12 for the last couple of years. So you're getting 2 squads that right now are in a really good position with where they lie with their current head coaching situations. Kalen DeBoer, you look at Dan Lanning, both had a lot of success year 1, and they got promising futures with their respective programs, with how well they are recruiting, how well they're utilizing the transfer portal. And I think that Washington and Oregon would make things really interesting in the Big Ten. Because the Big Ten is a conference that has great teams like Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, but I don't really think they have as much depth as the SEC does. And adding schools like Oregon and Washington bring you more depth. Now you're going to have 2 more teams that are going to be capable of being able to compete for a championship and being able to get up with Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. If you don't think that USC is going to be able to succeed in the Big Ten, you should at least think that Oregon is going to have a chance at being able to have success in this conference because they already beat Ohio State before. Washington is also a school that has had success against the Big Ten. And we seem to forget that Oregon and Washington have been to the college football playoffs. So these aren't schools that, they wouldn't succeed in the Big Ten. Okay, have that mindset if you want to, if you're a Big Ten fan. Like, Oregon already smacked Ohio State before, and they can very well do it again if they're given the opportunity. And Washington has a really talented roster, and it's really easy to recruit up there if you got the right head coach. And Kalen DeBoer looks like the right guy there. Now, for the other 2 schools who are rumored in these reports, Cal and Stanford, why the hell would they want them? Well, Stanford is a really prestigious academic institution. And if you're the Big Ten, adding Stanford to your conference, even if they don't really bring anything from a football standpoint, they're going to make you a more respectable conference when it comes to academics. Stanford is like the college football equivalent to Harvard, pretty much. In terms of FBS, do you know how many smart people go to Stanford? I got a homie that goes to Stanford. Really smart. He had a 4.2 GPA throughout high school. So Stanford is a really good institution when it comes to academics. From a football standpoint, judging from what they look like right now and what they looked like last season, they probably are going to be competing with Northwestern for the title of being the worst program in the Big Ten. And I know it sounds messed up. I didn't mean to say it like that, but it's kind of the truth. In the NIL and transfer portal era, it kind of isn't voting well for Stanford. They're not a school that can just get anybody out the transfer portal because guys have to be admitted into their university based on their academics, not just based on what they do on the football field. And you look at the fact that they don't really recruit all that well, even though they are in a good location for recruiting. It's not the easiest to recruit at Stanford due to the same situation that they have with the transfer portal. You can't just accept any recruit. Recruits have to meet a certain academic criteria, and these criteria are often pretty high and pretty lofty. So Stanford, I think they more just bring value to the conference from an academic standpoint, more from an athletic standpoint. I don't even think their basketball team is good. And Cal, I think they're a pretty prestigious academic institution as well. So adding Stanford and Cal would boost the academic resume of the Big Ten. And maybe Cal, they could get things going because they are in the state of Cali. So from a geographic standpoint, it allows the Big Ten to tap into that West Coast Cali market even further with adding USC and UCLA. And then you add Cal, you're pretty much gotten the whole state of Cali pretty much when it comes to college football in terms of the biggest teams in that state. So the Big Ten is eyeing 4 Pac-12 teams. This doesn't look good for the Pac-12. Most likely, Oregon and Washington are on their way out. If they don't leave for the Big Ten, I'm pretty confident they're going to the Big 12. The Big 12, I think, would gladly accept Oregon and Washington with open arms. And the Big Ten, also according to these reports, is discussing expanding to 18 to 20 teams. And you guys already know how it goes with this conference realignment stuff. One conference adds a couple of teams, another conference has to step in and add some more teams to keep it going. And the Pac-12, like I said earlier, there's nothing that they can really do to stay alive if this goes down. Bringing in SMU, Boise, San Diego State, I mean, it brings in more teams to your conference, but that's just about it. I mean, you're adding more numbers, but you're not really adding a lot of quality. You're not really adding teams that are going to make people want to tune into the Pac-12. And they're already struggling to negotiate a fair media rights deal on the level that these other conferences are, the Big 12 and the Big 10 and the SEC. So what makes anybody think that they're going to be able to get a respectable media rights deal if they lose Oregon and Washington and replace them with SMU and Boise? Come on, man. They're going to lose revenue dollars. It's going to make the conference look even worse. And losing Oregon and Washington would essentially make the Pac-12 a G5 conference. Honestly, now they do got Oregon State and Washington State, who I love, but those two schools, even though they are programs that are on the rise, I don't really think that those are schools that are going to be marketable when you're trying to get a media rights deal for the same amount of dollars that the Big 10, SEC, and Big 12 have. If anything, you'll be lucky to even get more than $2 million per school, with just Oregon State and Washington State being your two front-running teams. So the Big 10 has their eyes on taking 4 more teams out of the Pac-12 and pretty much putting the dagger into what already is a conference that's starting to die out. You ever play Mortal Kombat and you know when you get your opposing opponent to low health and you got the ability to use your finisher and they say, finish him? That's what the Big 12 is looking at the Pac-12 right now is saying. They're pretty much saying, finish them. And that's pretty much what the Big 10 is probably going to do. Like I said, I don't think it's a matter of if, but a matter of when Oregon and Washington leave the Pac-12 conference. And the Big 10, I think the only thing that's holding this back from happening is just that the Big 10, they're not ready yet to add more teams. But I'm pretty sure today, right now, if the Big 10 was to go up to Eugene, Oregon, or go up to Washington and say, hey, like, you guys are free to join us whenever you want to, I'm pretty sure Oregon and Washington hit that door just like that. Now, I was on Twitter last night and I saw somebody going back and forth with somebody else saying that the gap between the SEC and the Big 10 is not that big and the SEC is overrated. And I gotta strongly disagree with that. I think that the gap between the SEC and the Big 10 is pretty wide, and it's a pretty big margin between the two conferences. And yes, these are the two best conferences in college football, and I already know what the Big 10 fanboys are about to say. Man, you only got 2.5 teams in the SEC. Take away Georgia, Alabama, and LSU. What are you? Okay, you still got Tennessee. Okay, you still got Texas A&M. Arkansas is a pretty good school. Same thing with Ole Miss. You see, the difference between the Big 10 and the SEC is that the SEC has way more depth than the Big 10. And I'm not just talking about, in terms of college football playoff contenders. I'm talking about just overall depth. They got a lot of solid 7-8 win programs that are only 7-8 win programs because they're trapped in the SEC. If you were to take Arkansas and put them in the Big 10, a lot of things change. Now, they may not be on the level of a Michigan or Ohio State, but I think they could be on the level of a Penn State if they were to move to the Big 10. Put Texas A&M in the Big 10 and tell me they aren't one of the favorites to win that conference. Hell, put Tennessee in the Big 10, and they at least are the third best team in that conference right now, ahead of Penn State. And for the people who want to take away the best programs out of the SEC, okay, you take away Bama, Georgia, and LSU. You take away Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State from the Big 10, the Big 10 is nothing. Yeah, you got Wisconsin, you got some schools that got some rich history, but let's be honest. Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan have been carrying the Pac-12, the Big 10, on its back. Outside of those three schools, the Big 10 has nothing close to the level of what the SEC has, in my opinion. I mean, you got Wisconsin, who on most years, they're a good bet to give you 8-9 wins and possibly have a couple of 10-win seasons. But, I mean, you look at Illinois, they've been down for a while. Nebraska has been down for a very long time. So it's like, if you were to compare the middle of the pack Big Ten teams to the middle of the pack SEC teams, the SEC would still win. And when you look at the results for what's transpired on the field, the SEC has had the advantage over the Big Ten. The Big Ten hasn't got through the SEC and the college football playoffs in how long? The last time a Big Ten school really broke through was Urban Meyer with Ohio State when they won the national championship nearly a decade ago. So for this whole conversation between, how wide is the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is not that wide. There is a pretty big gap. All right. And if you don't want to admit that, I'm going to say you're a little bit biased. There are a lot of great teams in the SEC this year. And if you were to put them in the Big Ten, they would be way better. The Big Ten West last season was a disaster. That was awful. Honestly, like, how many great quality teams were really in the Big Ten West? And that's what people say about the Big Ten and why they try to make this argument for why it's almost as good as the SEC. Well, you got a lot of solid teams. You don't got a lot of Ohio States, but you got a lot of mid-tier teams. Okay, the mid-tier teams in the SEC, most of them are only mid-tier teams because they're in the SEC. Put them in a different conference like the Big Ten, where they're not going against juggernauts like Alabama and Georgia every single week, and a lot of things change. Hell, think about some of these programs that are down right now in the SEC and how good they can be when everything's going right. Florida and the Big Ten, if they were to get rolling with how good they are at recruiting due to the geographic location that they have, and if they get a good coach with a great coaching staff, they will cook in the Big Ten. You want to know why? Because they will be able to out-recruit Ohio State and Michigan due to the geographic location being in Florida. So when I'm looking at some of these Big Ten programs that have been down for years, Nebraska, when's the last time Nebraska was in the national championship conversation? It's been damn near decades. Last time Nebraska was competing for championships, I wasn't even born. The Big Ten and the SEC, there's a really considerable gap between the two. Now, it's not, you feel me? But it's pretty sizable. You know, the Big Ten has some solid teams, but the SEC has more solid teams than the Big Ten. I think that the SEC, when you look at their depth top to bottom, is better than any other conference in college football. I mean, you can go from your Georgias and your Alabamas and your LSU and go to Arkansas, who could easily be a 9-10 win team in the conference that's not as tough or as deep as the SEC. The Big Ten doesn't have the kind of depth that the SEC has. These mid-tier SEC programs are really great teams that potentially are just capped because of the scheduling, which soon will change, and the fact that they have other programs that recruit at a way higher level than them and just are juggernauts. Like Alabama, Georgia, LSU, take them out of the SEC, cool. There's still a lot of depth in this conference. Tennessee just had their best season in years. Like, we see how dangerous teams like Tennessee are in the SEC. Imagine how they could be in a less tough conference like the Big Ten that only has 3 teams. Like, it blows me how people say the SEC is so top heavy and we act like the Big Ten isn't. If anything, the Big Ten is more top heavy than the SEC, because you know who's going to win the Big Ten championship every single year. It's either going to come down to 1 or 2 schools, Ohio State or Michigan. And that might change, and it'll either be Ohio State, Michigan, or Penn State. But with the SEC, though, you act like teams that have won the SEC have all been blue bloods. Let's not forget that Auburn has won the SEC a couple of times. They've also won a national championship. They've been to a national championship appearance. Like, we just seem to forget how much depth is in the SEC. Like, there's just so much meat and potatoes in this conference. Even looking at a school like Kentucky, South Carolina, Kentucky is a team that won 10 games not too long ago. Mark Stoops is one of the most underrated head coaches in college football. Same thing with South Carolina. If they were playing in a way less difficult conference, they would be better than what they are. The SEC is a juggernaut, man. Every single team you play is a B+ caliber program. And the Big Ten, though, I can't say the same. You mean to tell me that Nebraska is as good as a Ole Miss or even the Mississippi State? Stop it. Stop it. You're being a little bit biased, man. You mean to tell me that Northwestern is better than any other team in the SEC? I would take Vanderbilt over Northwestern. Like, there are some really bad teams in the Big Ten Conference. When you look at the SEC, there's not really a team that you can look at and be like, oh yeah, they're going to be shitty. I can look at a lot of Big Ten schools right now and be like, yeah, they're probably not going to be that good this year. And like I said, the Big Ten has a lot of quality teams. You know, I think Maryland is a quality team. Same thing with Michigan State. But look at how awful some of their worst teams are. Some of their middle of the pack teams are. Indiana, Rutgers are two of the worst programs in the Power 5. Same thing with Northwestern. Nebraska has been down for years. And when you get to the top half, okay, you get Purdue, who is pretty decent. Iowa, who is pretty solid. Minnesota is pretty solid. Wisconsin is one of those programs that's going to give you 8-9 wins consistently and pop off a couple of 10-win seasons here and there. But overall, compare this to the SEC, I don't really think it should be an argument or really that big of a debate. I think the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is considerably wide. And if you don't really see that, I think you're being a little bit biased. And you can bring up bowl results all you want to. Of course, there's going to be a couple of Big Ten teams that beat some SEC schools and some SEC schools that done beaten some Big Ten schools. But if we were to have a round robin, all these SEC schools going against all the schools from the Big Ten, I'm pretty confident the SEC will have the way better record by a landslide. I mean, I'm pretty sure that most of the mid-tier programs will eat up on Iowa. They don't even know how to coach a competent offense up there. There are people in that Iowa Hawkeyes fan base that are hoping that this team is bad just so they can fire their head coach. So I don't think that the gap between the Big Ten and the SEC isn't that huge. Like, it is that huge. And if you don't believe that, I think you're being a little bit biased. The SEC is the most dominant conference in college football right now. It has been the most dominant conference in college football for well over, 2 decades? So the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten, if you're one of those, the gap isn't as big as you think, people, you're wrong. Go look at the Big Ten top to bottom and compare that to the SEC top to bottom. Not really that close. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, make sure that you go ahead, rate us 5 stars. You can find us on all podcasting platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. You can find the JT Sports Podcast. Rate us 5 stars if you enjoyed this episode. We're trying to get to 100 5-star reviews before the start of the college football and NFL season. So go ahead, rate us 5 stars. All you got to do is type in JT Sports Podcast on Apple and Spotify and it will pop up. Or you can go down to the description down below, scroll down a little bit, and there will be the links to the Apple and Spotify versions of the podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another episode of the JT Sports Podcast.